Today on Detroit Muscle, it's part 2 of our 1966 Mustang update and overhaul. This time we're gonna get under there and bring that suspension up a few notches, along with swapping in a modern rack steering system. Then we go for a drive. Also, don't miss this big block powered SS El Camino.
Hey guys, we're back on this 66 Mustang that we're working to bring into the 21st century. Last time we was working on it, we managed to slip in a T5 5-speed that's going to give this thing the overdrive to help it out on the highway. Now today, we're going to continue that by working on the front suspension.
Now our Mustang suspension is basically stock. It does have an aftermarket shock, but the springs are original, so are the control arms, and even the disc brake setup. Now with these stamp control arms and stock style bushings, there's a lot of deflection, which can cause understeer. Speaking of steering, this car does have power steering, but it's got a slow ratio box, and by the looks of these tie rod ends, the steering components need to be replaced as well. Now someone has upgraded to these polyurethane bushings and a bigger sway bar along the way. Those are great upgrades, but those are the easy ones. We're gonna take this thing up a few notches. The first thing we gotta get out of the way is going to be the brakes, starting with getting the calipers unbolted and pulled off. These are stock brakes, but off of a 1975 to 80 Granada, which is a nice cheap upgrade for these early Mustangs. Now the rotor has to go, and these are the type that fasten down to the spindle. We'll get the dust cap pried off, then we'll clean things up a bit. This pin has to come out of the castle nut and save it for reinstallation. Next, we're going to pull the dust shield off. It's pretty easy, just 3 bolts hold it on. We'll also unhook our rubber brake line to get it and the caliper out of the way. I'm going to use one of these brake line plugs so we won't waste any brake fluid. The tie rod can now be disconnected, so pull that castle nut off and give her a few whacks.
Screw jack will help us put the suspension under a little bit of a load and get the spring compressed a bit. Now we can disconnect the sway bar from the lower control arm. We'll also go ahead and disconnect the bottom half of the shocks. Then we can gently begin pulling some tension off of the suspension. These spacers are a quick and dirty fix to spring fatigue that we won't be reusing, so they need to go away. Now the top end of the shocks can be loosened up, and the shocks and upper mounts can come right out of the top.
All right, now we're going to install the spring compressor. The reason we need this is because to remove the control arm, we need to compress the spring. The fingers of the compressor simply slide down into the center of the spring and hook onto the coils. After snugging the compressor up by hand first, the spring can then be compressed with a socket and ratchet. I know it's hard, but please resist the temptation to use an impact on the compressor. Once the spring is free of the upper control arm, you can take the tension off of the spring and it'll just fall right out. All right, now that we got the spring out of the way, everything's nice and loose in here, so we can move everything around to get the bolts off. Now, the control arm bolts are right under here. Can't see them from here, so I'm gonna take the spindle off. I can pry that upper control arm out of the way, get to those bolts.
The cotter pin comes out, followed by the castle nuts that hold the ball joints to the spindle. Then you can tap on the spindle near the joint to loosen the taper end of the ball joint from its seat in the spindle. Then the spindle can be removed, which we'll set aside to use later. The radius arm is next, and as you can see, this one has been upgraded to polyurethane bushings, so we'll hold on to those as well. From the underside, we wedged a wrench in to hold the bolt head. Then we remove the nuts from the top side. The upper control arm is now free, and it can go in a scrap bin. For our upgraded components, we went to National Parts Depot and got this pretty much bolt-in kit. Now it's got tubular upper and lower control arms that are stronger and lighter than the stock components, and it's got improved geometry in it for better driving and handling. We've got some coilover shocks as well, so that we can adjust the rebound and the compression of them, and since they're coilovers, you know we can adjust the ride height, so that's no big deal. The first thing that we got to do is drill a couple little bitty holes, but that's pretty much all the cutting and grinding that we're going to have to do.
With a couple of bolts fed from the inside of the shock tower in the original holes, the template can slide into place and get cinched down. Using the small holes in the template, 3/16 pilot holes can be drilled. The template is then removed along with the bolts. Then the holes are drilled out to 9/16 to accommodate the newer upper control arms. The bolts installed through the upper arms and into the new lower holes. Then the spacer slides in and the bolts can be snugged up for now. The new tubular lower control arms bolt right into the stock location and attach using the new hardware that comes with the kit.
After the break, find out how easy it can be to do a major steering upgrade for a first-gen Mustang. Plus, find out what makes this SSL Camino a hard-to-find heavy hitter in the muscle car world.
All right, guys, we got the control arms and the spindles mounted up. Now we need to assemble our coilovers. No big deal. Let me show you how they work. Using a pair of snap ring pliers, the snap ring that holds the upper mount to the shock can be removed. All right, now if you notice, this thing spins on relatively really easy, but it won't once you put some spring tension on it. So it's always a good idea to take some anti-seize, slather it in there pretty good. It's kind of some preventive maintenance. A little bit of this stuff goes a long ways, and the nickel kind would blend in a little better. But what we had on the shelf was copper. Don't forget this little wear shim here, because that's where the spring's going to be riding. That upper mount can go back in, followed by the snap ring. Back up top, the upper shock mount simply bolts into the stock holes using stock hardware, and then can be tightened. That should be plenty tight enough.
So the next step is to take this assembled coilover, slide it up into place, and install the upper mount first. But the problem is this spring needs to be compressed to get everything to line up properly. So we've taken some longer bolts here. We'll install those. Those we'll use as alignment pins. Then we'll get the lower mount mounted, put our jack under our lower control arm, jack it up into place, and then replace these with our regular bolts. Using those longer alignment bolts that I just mentioned, we hung the coilover from the upper mount. Then we bolted the lower mount to the shock and got the nuts started. Then we lowered the upper control arm down onto the lower shock mount and bolted the two together using the supplied hardware. These can then be tightened down. The floor jack can then be used to lift on the lower control arm, which lifts the spindle, upper arm, and eventually the coilover into place. Our longer alignment bolts can then be removed one at a time, being replaced by the correct ones and tightened. The stock radius arms can then go back in using the existing hardware and bushings. Sway bar links were next, which we replaced with a new set that we picked up from AutoZone.
Like we mentioned to you guys earlier, we wanted to take our Mustang and make it a little more driver friendly. So we're going to do a conversion that's pretty popular. We're going to convert from that power steering gearbox to a rack and pinion setup. So we went to National Parts Depot and they had exactly what we were needing. They offer a kit that comes with your power steering hoses, your U-joints that connect it to the steering column, tie rods, the rack of course, and a power steering pump. Now this may look a little bit intimidating, but it's really not all that bad. We started by removing the steering linkage as one. First by removing it from the pitman arm, followed by the idler arm assembly. The next thing to go was the steering box, which we won't be needing anymore. This lower chassis brace needs to come out, because the new steering rack will use these mounting holes. The rack goes right up into place, gets bolted to the subframe, and gets torqued to 65 foot-pounds. The outer tie rods then screw into place and attach to the spindle using the new locking nut provided.
Stick around and we'll take you for a ride in that oh-so-controversial muscle car / pickup hybrid. Then we'll see how our Mustang mods panned out. Detroit Muscle salutes the 1968 El Camino SS 396.
It's the age-old question, car or truck?
Well, it's a little of both. And it will haul, if you know what I mean.
The SS 396 turned this 68 El Camino into one hairy hauler. The name means the road, and this baby owns it.
Yep, and if you saw it coming up in your rearview mirror, you might think a Malibu was on your tail. That's because they've got the exact same front end.
This one's in primo condition, which is hard to find since only about 5,000 were made to begin with. So getting behind the wheel of one is truly taking the road less traveled.
The El Camino debuted way back in 1959 on the full-size Impala platform as Chevy's answer to the Ranchero. Then starting in '64 and running through 1977, it jumped over to the Chevelle platform. It even had a lesser-known brother in the GMC Sprint, often mistaken for a Camino. Caminos got the Super Sport treatment for the first time in '68. The performance hood, blacked-out grille and tailgate, and badges all over the place signaled it could do a lot more than just haul lumber.
Plus, you had your choice of 3 versions of the 396 Big Block that went all the way up to 375 horsepower. It could say adios to the Fairlane or Roadrunner any day.
It also came with a 12-bolt rear end, but for some reason you couldn't get the heavy-duty suspension like on the Malibu SS. This was the only year that the El Camino SS 396 was its own model, so you can easily identify a true one by its VIN. The third number should be an 8.
68 also brought some Coke bottle style curves to the car, with more rounded side panels and a raked front overhang. It was longer too by about 10 inches, most of which showed up in the truck bed.
Inside it's a cozy fit, with just enough room behind the seats for a spare tire, and a handy dandy hiding spot. This one doesn't have the 4-speed, but that's actually a good thing. The shift linkage was lousy that year. A rare option was the unusual roller tack, which is just as hard to read now as it was back then. Some of the '68 models did come with the inline-6, but the V8 models were by far more popular, as they should be. But out of almost 42,000 El Caminos made that year, only 5,190 were SS's. Today, the SS El Camino is often overlooked in the history books. Whatever you call it, car, truck, this is one serious piece of muscle.
Coming up, we'll see if those mods made our Mustang an all-around better ride.
Hey y'all, welcome back. Now whenever we rolled our Mustang into the shop, we knew we wanted to do several upgrades, and one of those was going to be addressing the wheels. Now what came on it is a set of torque thrusts. Now there's nothing wrong with them, and they're a safe bet with whatever you're working on. But our main problem with these is that they're a 15, and we wanted to upgrade the size. So what we decided to go with is a set of these 17-inch American Racing Cobra inspired wheels. Now whenever you pick a wheel, you want to make sure to pick something that's going to complement your ride. And our car with those stripes and body kit, it's going to do all that. Another item that we picked is this 3-bar spinner. Now I know it's just a fancy center cap, but it's really going to set off our combo. As for tires, we got a set of Continental ExtremeContact DWSs. Now this is an ultra high performance tire that doubles as an all-season tire as well. So that means you can ride on this thing year round in all kinds of conditions. It's got an asymmetrical tread design that combines cornering and stability, traction on wet snowy roads, and a design that displaces water to resist hydroplaning. Here's something cool. These wear indicators tell you how much tread is left for what appropriate conditions. As they wear away, it lets you know if you're good up to snowy roads, wet roads, and when they're worn down to the D, dry roads. So let's get these on the car and see how good they look.
Now we think that it's a bit of an improvement over what we started with, even though it looked pretty good already. But it was noisy as heck on the highway, and don't forget that we converted it to a 5-speed overdrive as well for drivability. All right, so we're back out on the highway now, and we did this before at 70 miles per hour, which is where we are now. The tach was at 3,300 RPM, and we were getting a reading of 97 decibels on the decibel meter. Now, once we did this overdrive swap, cruising again at 70, and it's at 2,200 RPM, so that's a noticeable difference. 1,100 RPM drop. All right, let's crank up this decibel meter and see what we can get out of it. And it's 89 decibels, so wow. 8 decibel drop. That's a considerable difference.
Yeah, this is definitely much more manageable of a highway cruiser now.
Definitely. So the suspension that came in these cars from the factory wasn't really optimal. You can certainly do some things to improve on it, like bigger sway bars, and tighter bushings and things like that, but there really wasn't anything you could do at the time to improve the handling drastically. And with this aftermarket kit that we put in here, changed the geometry of the front suspension for one, tightened it up quite a bit, and then we added the steering rack, which completely changes the way this thing turns.
If you've got a street strip or bracket drag car, you need a good torque converter to get that power from the front to the back. If that's the case, you need to take a look at one of these TCI 10-inch competition torque converters. To start with, these are furnace brazed and they contain reinforced fins, which means they're going to be more durable than your run-of-the-mill converter. And they're built to handle up to 750 horsepower. They're designed to be a dual-purpose unit, leaning more toward the strip side. They're available with a 3,800 to 4,500 stall, and this will help you get off that tree and across the finish line in a big old hurry.
Are you working on taking your old school small block Chevy to the next level? Well, you need to check out these Trick Flow roller rockers. They're aluminum with an anodized finish and provide proper valve timing with both stock and aftermarket heads. They're heat treated with CNC machined bodies, needle bearing fulcrums, and roller tip. They even come with these locking nuts to keep them all cinched down. These are available either as a 1.5 or 1.6 ratio configuration, and you can get them from Summit Racing either as a set of 16 or individually.
One big brake upgrade you can step into is a set of drilled and slotted rotors. Not only do they run cooler, but they sweep away gases. Well, PowerStop not only offers this for your late model rides, but they got them for the classic ones too. These are a set from their Evolution line, which are silver zinc plated to make them rust resistant. They have a direct OE fit and vane count, in this case for a first-gen Mustang. That makes them easy to install, and you can couple them with factory components or upgrade to a whole kit. Well, I hope you can manage to stop by for our next Detroit Muscle. We'll see y'all then.